I'll take you to the Judicial Service Commission, which is interviewing candidates for the 5 vacant positions at the Supreme Court of Appeal. Several judges have faced a grilling today over judgments they have made and high-profile decisions they've taken. Govan Whittles is there. Govan, very good afternoon to you. One's track record, their past, and the decisions that they've made have really come out under the spotlight today.
They have indeed, and the judges that have appeared so far include Judge Potterhill, Judge Smith, and of course Judge Valley, who wrapped up just before the lunch break. And today there has been a focus on the quality of their judgments, their explanation behind their decisions, how many of those judgments have been appealed and successfully so. But now we have a total of 9 judges that have appeared here at the Judicial Service Commission interviews for those 5 vacancies at the SCA. And joining me to discuss how these candidates have been performing is Mr. Benedict Phiri. He's from Use Prudentia, and he joins us now for this conversation. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Phiri. Before we get into the performance of the candidates today, we've had 9 judges appear before this panel now. These interviews have been different because we've seen a different style of questioning. It hasn't gone on for as long as the previous ones. Well, some of them did drag out. But what did you make of the performance of some of the candidates, and who stood out so far?
Yeah, I think the candidates, it's been quite a mixed bag if you look at the 2 days overall. I think the JSC has been great in keeping the themes consistent. It's questions around leadership within the judiciary, it's questions around quality of judgment, it's questions around transformation, it's questions around collegiality, and so forth. And I think most of the candidates have faced similar questions, so no one has an advantage or a disadvantage. I think today what we saw coming to the fore really was, for instance, Judge Potterhill, formidable insofar as the number of judgments she's written and which are reported, and only 5 which are overturned. So there was an appreciation for her work ethic, but also an appreciation for the quality of the work that she's produced with a formidable work ethic, as well as the leadership that she's shown to her provincial division. And I think that can be contrasted, for instance, with Judge Valley, who took a bit of criticism around, even though he is a busy judge and he produces a number of judgments quite rapidly, the quality of those judgments around the evidence he takes into account, at some instances, sticking to legal precedent, that has come under scrutiny. So I think today we've seen a much greater focus on quality, especially within the context of the workload and the work ethic that these judges are expected to work under in the Supreme Court of Appeal. Justice Meyer saying over 1,000 appeals a year, so it's not an easy workload when you're there.
And the Supreme Court of Appeal has been described by the Judicial Service Commission commissioners here as the apex court. One of them described it as the court that's supposed to settle precedent, clear confusion. And with that in mind, the work ethic and the number of times that judges' appeals have been successfully overturned does seem to have come into sharp focus, as well as the number of times that the judges' judgments have been reported on. Why are those 2 things important?
Reported judgments are important because that's where we learn the law and that's where we find the law. So if you are going to work in the Supreme Court of Appeal, more often than not, the judgments are likely to be reported. So there have to be a quality judgment that will withstand scrutiny. Even if it goes to the Constitutional Court and may be appealed or overturned at the Constitutional Court, it must still be a judgment that contributes to the body of the law. So it is important to know that a judge contributes in a marketable and meaningful way to the body of the law, because that's really what the role they'll be playing within the Supreme Court of Appeal is.
Lastly then, what did you think of the questions that have come from the JSC commissioners today compared to what we saw earlier and yesterday?
I think yesterday there was a lot more of a focus on transformation for most of the candidates. Today we've seen really a shift insofar as the quality of the work is concerned. But the questions have been consistent. We have seen maybe 1 or 2 little skirmishes that could have degenerated, but I think Justice Meyer has done well to keep the interviews going and ensure that we don't have personal skirmishes in some of the interviews.
All right, thank you so much. That's Benedict Piri speaking to us on the sidelines of the JSC interviews that are happening here in Melrose Arch. And after the lunch adjournment, we're expecting to hear from Judge Matujane, who's also presided over a number of high-profile cases, including that review application of the CR17 funds for the President's campaign for the election in the ANC. He'll most likely face a lot of tough questions from these commissioners who have been straightforward in questioning candidates on sensitive cases that relate to the executive arm of the state and what they believe would be judicial overreach and what qualifies as proper and fit intervention to ensure that that arm of the state abides by the Constitution. We'll be here for those interviews and we'll bring you the latest as it happens. It's back to you for now.
Very well, Govan Whittles. Let's leave it there for now. Of course, continuing to bring you the very latest coming out of those interviews.